It started with the sound of my phone buzzing against the wooden nightstand, a low, steady vibration that wormed its way into my dreams before pulling me awake. I remember blinking at the darkness, my eyes heavy, my throat dry, wondering what time it was. The glow from the clock beside my bed read 2:13 p.m. I almost let it go to voicemail. Nobody calls at that hour unless it's bad news, and I wasn't ready for bad news. But there was something about the sound, not frantic, just insistent, like it knew I'd eventually pick up. Without thinking, I reached for the phone and pressed it to my ear. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice barely there. At first, there was nothing. Just the faint hiss of the line, the sort of emptiness you hear when no one's breathing on the other end. And then a voice I knew as well as my own heartbeat. "Hi, Mom." My stomach flipped. Every muscle in my body went still, as if my brain had just slammed on the brakes. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. Because the person speaking, the boy speaking, had been dead for 11 years. Lucas, my son, my baby. Gone. I know people say grief plays tricks on the mind, that you can almost hear the voice of someone you've lost if you miss them enough. But this wasn't my mind filling in the blanks. This wasn't memory. This was his voice, clear and alive, soft with that teasing edge he always had when he wanted something from me. For a moment my thoughts refused to connect. I wanted to speak, to say his name, but all that came out was a breath. He chuckled lightly, a sound I hadn't heard since he was 19 years old. "I'm coming home, Mom. Leave the door unlocked." My heart started to pound so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Lucas?" I finally managed to say, my voice shaking. "Lucas, you—" But before I could finish, the line clicked dead. The silence in my bedroom felt heavier than before, like the air had thickened. I pulled the phone away from my ear, stared at the screen, trying to process what had just happened. It showed unknown number, as if it wanted to hide where the call came from. For a few seconds, I convinced myself it was a cruel prank. Someone with a similar voice. Maybe some sick joke meant to hurt me. But then I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks at the front door. My head turned toward the hallway before I even realized I'd moved. The knocks weren't loud, but they carried through the quiet, like gunshots. 1, 2, 3. I froze in bed, my mind screaming at me to stay where I was. 11 years ago, I stood in a courtroom while they read the charges against my son. 5 murders, 5 families destroyed. I sat there numb, as they described in vivid detail what he'd done, the way he smiled through it, how he never showed a flicker of remorse. I visited him in prison once, just once. He looked me in the eye and told me some people were born different, and that I should stop pretending I didn't see it in him when he was little. 3 weeks later, he was dead, shot during an attempted escape, buried in a small plot with no headstone. I was there. I saw the casket lowered into the dirt. I felt the earth hit the lid. So Who-Who-What-Win was at my door now. I sat there for what felt like an hour, though I know it couldn't have been more than a minute, straining to hear anything else. My house is small, just a narrow hallway from my bedroom to the front. The door isn't far. Too close, really. I wanted to believe I was imagining the whole thing, that maybe the knocks had been the wind or the creak of the old wood settling. But deep down I knew. I could feel it. Someone or something was standing just beyond that thin strip of wood, waiting. My fingers were still gripping the phone so tightly they hurt. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? That my dead son called me and is now at my door? They'd think I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. I tried to calm myself, to reason it out. Maybe someone got hold of an old recording of Lucas's voice. Maybe the knocks were just some kid playing a late-night prank. But that thought didn't make me feel better. It made me feel worse. Because if it wasn't him, it was someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and why it would terrify me. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, my bare feet cold against the floor. Every step down the hallway felt like walking deeper into a tunnel, with no light at the end. When I reached the corner where I could see the front door, I stopped. The porch light was on, casting a pale glow through the frosted glass. For a second, I thought I saw a shadow shift across it, the vague outline of a head turning slowly toward me. My breath caught and I stepped back, my heel hitting the hallway wall. No more knocks, no voice, just that suffocating stillness. I didn't open the door. I didn't even get close. Instead, I turned and walked backward, keeping my eyes on the glass until I was back in my room. I locked the door, slid under the covers, and lay there with the phone in my hand until the sun started to rise. I told myself I wouldn't answer if it rang again, but I also knew if it did, and if that voice spoke to me once more, I'd have no choice. Because no matter how much you tell yourself, something is impossible. When it calls you Mom, you want to believe. I didn't sleep much that night. When the first grey light of morning slid across my bedroom wall, I realized I'd spent the whole night lying there, half awake, listening for footsteps that never came. My throat felt raw, my eyes burned, and every small creak of the house made my muscles tighten. I kept replaying, almost dreading what I might find. At first glance, everything looked normal. The porch was empty. The glass in the door reflected nothing but my own tired face. But then I saw it, faint dark patches on the wooden floor just inside the entryway. I crouched down and my stomach turned cold. Wet footprints, bare feet. The prints weren't just inside the door. They trailed down the hallway, each one perfectly shaped, toes spread slightly apart, the kind of print that comes from someone walking slowly, and they led toward my bedroom. My skin prickled. I followed them, my eyes locked on the path they made, half expecting to see something, someone, still standing there at the end. But the trail stopped right at my bedroom door. Not outside the house, not by the front door, right outside where I'd been sleeping. I touched one of the prints with my fingertips. It was damp, but not from water. The smell hit me before I could pull my hand back. Earthy, sour like dirt mixed with something metallic. I scrubbed my hand on my pajama pants and stood quickly. My first instinct was to clean it up, to erase whatever had left them here. I grabbed a mop, but no matter how many times I ran it over the wood, the marks didn't fade. They clung to the floor like stains burned into the grain. By mid-morning, I decided I couldn't keep this to myself. I got in the car and drove to the police station. Officer Briggs was on duty, a man I'd known casually from around town but never really spoken to. He greeted me with polite confusion, asking if I was all right. I told him everything, how the phone rang at 2:13, how the voice sounded exactly like Lucas, the words he'd said, the knocks at the door, and finally the footprints. I didn't mention the smell. It sounded too insane. He listened without interrupting, but as I spoke, I noticed the color drain from his face. When I finished, he leaned forward, elbows on his desk, and asked me to repeat the number that had called me. I read it off my phone screen, the one listed under unknown. He typed it into his computer. The silence that followed stretched long enough for my heart to start pounding again. Finally, he looked up at me, his voice lower now. "Ma'am, we traced that exact number last night. It's from a location about 10 miles out of town, a farmhouse that was the scene of a homicide." I opened my mouth to ask why that mattered, but he continued. "The victim's mother has been dead for 20 years. I stared at him, trying to find the logic in what he'd just told me, but there was none. It didn't make sense, and somehow that made it worse. The rest of the conversation is a blur. He offered to send a patrol car by my place for the next few nights, but the idea of police lights parked outside my house felt like an announcement to whatever was happening that I was afraid, and I didn't want him to know. When I got home, the afternoon passed in a strange haze. I tried to distract myself, laundry, dishes, meaningless chores, but my mind kept circling back to those words. "I'm coming home. Leave the door unlocked." At 2:13 the following morning, I was already awake, sitting up in bed, phone in my hand. I told myself I wouldn't answer this time, but when it rang, the sound slicing through the silence of the room, I found my thumb moving before I could stop it. "Mom," he said, his voice softer, colder now. "They're all here, just waiting for you." My chest tightened. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. There was a pause. Then a sound like wet soil shifting, slow and deliberate, came through the line. "You'll see," he said, "soon." The call ended, leaving the room darker than before. I stayed frozen in place, phone pressed to my ear long after the dial tone had gone. Outside my window, the street was empty. No cars, no people, but somewhere out there in the shadows, or under the ground, my son was waiting. That night I didn't bother pretending I could sleep. I sat on the couch with every light in the house turned on, staring at the front door like if I looked away for even a second, something would slip in. The clock ticked past midnight, then 1 a.m., each minute heavier than the last. I kept telling myself the phone wouldn't ring again, that maybe whatever this was had run its course, but in my gut I knew better. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the phone in my lap lit up. No number, just the same word, unknown. My thumb hovered over the decline button. I could end it right here, but I didn't. The moment I pressed answer, there was a sound on the line, not his voice at first, but breathing slow and ragged, like someone savoring each inhale. Then, almost gently, "Mom, why did you lock the door?" My body stiffened. My eyes flicked to the deadbolt. I had locked every door and window hours ago, checked them twice. "Lucas," I said, my voice cracking, "you're not here. You can't be here." A low laugh rolled through the speaker, deep enough that it vibrated in my hand. "I've always been here." The call ended. Before I could even lower the phone, the lights in the living room flickered once, twice, then went out completely. The sudden darkness was suffocating. The only light came from the faint glow of the street lamp outside, filtering in through the blinds, casting thin lines across the floor. That was when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of movement coming from the basement. Slow steps, dragging slightly, as if whatever was down there wasn't in a hurry because it knew I had nowhere to go. I grabbed the flashlight from the coffee table and aimed it toward the basement door at the far end of the hallway. Slow steps dragging slightly, as if whatever was down there wasn't in a hurry because it knew I had nowhere to go. I grabbed the flashlight from the coffee table and aimed it toward the basement door at the far end of the hallway. The beam was shaky, my hand trembling so badly it made the light dance against the wall. Another step, then another, each one closer. The air coming from the basement was colder than it should have been, carrying with it that same damp, earthy smell I'd noticed on the footprints. Without thinking, I whispered his name. The steps stopped. My phone buzzed in my other hand. I looked down and froze. The screen didn't show unknown this time. It showed my own name, my number, as if I was calling myself. Against every ounce of logic in me, I answered, "Mom," the voice said, but it wasn't coming through the phone. It was behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam slicing through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Then the basement door creaked. Just an inch, maybe two, enough for the smell to hit me full force, making my stomach twist. I should have run. I should have grabbed my keys, my bag, anything, and just left. But something kept me rooted to the spot, as if my feet had sunk into the floor. The door opened wider, slowly, painfully slow, until I could see the top of the stairs. A shadow moved there. Its shape wrong, too tall, too thin, and it swayed slightly like it was waiting for me to notice it. My flashlight caught just enough detail to make my blood run cold and pale skin smeared with dirt, eyes black and shining like oil, and a mouth that stretched into a smile I remembered from old family photos. "You buried me, Mom," he whispered, and it sounded like the dirt was still in his throat. "Now it's your turn." My body finally reacted. I stumbled backward, the flashlight slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. The beam spun wildly, casting quick, jagged glimpses of him stepping onto the first stair, then the second. His movements were slow but deliberate, like he knew I wouldn't make it far. I turned and ran for the front door, fumbling with the lock, my hands slick with sweat. Behind me I could hear the creak of each step under his weight, closer and closer. I got the deadbolt undone just as his footsteps reached the top of the stairs. My hand was on the handle when a cold, wet grip wrapped around my ankle. I screamed, kicking hard, but his fingers dug in like steel hooks. The smell of dirt filled my nose, overwhelming. And in that moment I realized it wasn't just coming from him. It was on me now, clinging to my skin. His grip yanked me backward, my nails scratching the wood floor as I fought to reach the door. My heel hit the fallen flashlight, and the light beam caught his face, just long enough for me to see. The soil packed under his fingernails, the empty holes where his nose should have been, the smile stretching wider than it should have been possible. "We've been waiting," he said, and I swear I felt the words vibrate through the floorboards. In one final pull, he dragged me toward the basement. The flashlight rolled away, the light spinning, catching flashes of his form above me, his face leaning close until I could feel the cold seep off him into my skin. The last thing I saw before the basement swallowed us was the front door. Still slightly open, the night air spilling in, and then it was gone, replaced by darkness so thick it felt alive. Somewhere in that darkness there were others. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them breathing, circling, waiting for me to join them.